Right under a busy part of Rome is an underground maze that was sealed off a century ago. In Israel, there's a cave that stayed shut for 100,000 years, sealing away carefully buried skeletons. And in Jerusalem, a 3,000-year-old pagan shrine cave was sealed tight during a king's crackdown on old religions. These are ancient caves found sealed for thousands of years. So right under one of the most tourist-heavy spots in Rome, there's a hidden city that people completely forgot about. It's called the Grottino del Campidoglio, and it's this underground maze of tunnels, cisterns, shops, taverns. It was all sealed off about 100 years ago during Mussolini's time. He basically shut it all down and built over it, probably hoping people would forget it existed, and for the most part they did. It's been locked up and gathering dust since the 1920s. Now archaeologists and city planners are finally opening it back up, and what they're finding is insane. They found Roman-era plumbing, wine cellars, even a freaking ancient bakery, and some parts go as far back as 2,000 years. It's like the Roman version of a fallout shelter. They're planning to open it to the public around 2026 or 27, but for now, it's still under restoration. Tinshemet Cave in Israel stayed shut for about 100,000 years. 100,000. It was only just discovered recently, and what archaeologists found inside is kind of eerie. They found 5 skeletons buried in fetal positions. They'd been carefully placed there, and they were buried with red ochre and stone tools alongside them. That red powder, the ochre, was probably used for rituals. It's something ancient people used in burials to honor the dead. Everything here was pretty well preserved. Makes sense though, the cave was sealed really tight with ash and rock, keeping everything protected from the elements all that time. So it's basically a prehistoric time capsule. The bones are thought to belong to a very early group of humans, possibly from a now extinct species. Interesting they were buried the way they were though, because it seems like these ancient people already had some idea of ritual or ceremony going on. In Jerusalem, archaeologists discovered a sealed cave that hadn't been touched for about 3,000 years. Inside was a complete pagan shrine from the Iron Age. An altar, a standing stone, burnt animal bones, and what looked like ceremonial ritual items scattered across the floor. Based on the layout and the dating, it was probably sealed up during the reign of King Hezekiah around the 8th century BCE. Hezekiah basically went on a mission to shut down all the old pagan worship. He tore down altars, he smashed idols, he closed off shrines that didn't follow the official religion. The space wasn't huge, but it was built for ceremony. The altar was a flat stone slab, stained with ash and soot, and offerings had been placed around it, most likely animal sacrifices. Tools used in rituals were found nearby as well, like carved stones and incense burners. None of it had been disturbed. People using it might have been scared they'd get in trouble or worse, so they just blocked it off and never came back. Latnija Cave helped rewrite the history of early human life on Malta. Until recently, researchers thought the first people arrived around 7,000 years ago, but this cave pushed that back by another 1,000. It had collapsed naturally and stayed sealed for about 8,500 years. When archaeologists got inside, they found animal bones, fire pits, stone tools, and the partial remains of a human skull. The tools were basic, simple flint flakes and blades, but they were sharp enough to cut meat and process hides. Burn marks on bones showed they were cooking food in there. These people were hunter-gatherers, not farmers, which means they were living on the island long before those later groups showed up with things like farming and permanent villages. Most researchers thought Malta wasn't settled until those farming communities arrived, but this cave proves people were already here, living off wild animals and plants thousands of years earlier. But at some point, the entrance to the cave collapsed, sealing it off and keeping everything inside preserved for thousands of years. The Garma Cave in northern Spain was sealed off by a rockfall about 17,000 years ago. Because of that, it's one of the best preserved Ice Age sites ever found. When archaeologists finally got inside, they found human footprints still pressed into the floor, as if someone had just walked through and left. The cave walls were covered in paintings. There were animals, more abstract shapes, handprints, and scattered across the floor were stone tools, bone needles, pendants, and butchered animal bones. They also found what looked like a bed made from branches and animal skins. tucked into a corner. One section of the cave had bones set up in patterns, like it was some kind of ritual or offering or something. Either that or someone was just bored. They also found torches left behind by whoever used this place last. The cave wasn't rediscovered until 1995, and it's still not open to the public because researchers just don't want to mess with the conditions inside. Fair enough. Sheriden Cave sits in northwest Ohio, and it was completely sealed off at the end of the last ice age about 11,000 years ago. A sheet of glacial mud blocked the entrance, which basically turned the cave into a storage locker, except prehistoric. Archaeologists found some pretty incredible stuff in here. Spear points and butchered animal bones from creatures that don't even exist anymore. Things like giant beavers and an ancient wild boar type animal called a flat-headed pecaries. I've never heard of anything like that before. Some of the bones still had cut marks on them. There were even pieces of leather and wood which almost never survived that long. The tools belonged to a group of early Americans known as the Late Paleo-Indians. This cave gives one of the clearest looks at how they lived. There were remnants of fire pits. The floors had layers of ash, bone, and charcoal built up over time. But once the entrance sealed, that was it. No more moisture, no more animals, no more people. So everything just froze in place. Most prehistoric sites in North America have been picked over or damaged by weather, but this one stayed just as it was left for thousands of years. Vanguard Cave is part of a sea cliff on the Rock of Gibraltar, and for about 40,000 years, a section of it was completely sealed by sand and debris. When researchers finally dug into it, they found a chamber that hadn't been seen since Neanderthals were walking the earth. Inside were fossilized bones from animals like lynxes, hyenas, and seals, along with stone tools. It looks like the Neanderthals had used the space for shelter and possibly for food storage. The cave was sealed so well that the inner chamber stayed totally preserved. Archaeologists even found evidence of hearths where fires had been lit, with layers of ash and charred bones stacked up under the sand. What's strange is how long this place stayed buried. The sand kept everything in a vacuum-like state for tens of thousands of years. We're only now starting to understand how Neanderthals lived by studying what they left behind in that sealed chamber. Roche-Cotard Cave in France was sealed by sediment somewhere between 57,000 and 75,000 years ago, and it stayed that way until it was recently excavated. What they found inside were scratch marks on the cave walls in patterns, not just completely random. The engravings were made by Neanderthals, not modern humans, which makes them the oldest known Neanderthal cave art ever discovered. That's a big deal, because for a long time scientists didn't think Neanderthals were really capable of self-expression like this. So this cave changes that. There weren't any paintings or animals drawn, just these etched patterns, but still pretty cool. Along with the engravings, they found stone tools and animal bones, meaning that people had spent a good deal of time in there. So this one's really cool because it was found under a medieval castle. At Pembroke Castle in Wales, there's a cave called Wogan Cavern that had been sealed off by a buildup of mineral deposits, basically a bunch of stalagmites that blocked the entrance for tens of thousands of years. When researchers got inside, they found evidence that people had used the cave at least 40,000 years ago. That puts it in the same time range as both early Homo sapiens and the last of the Neanderthals in Britain. They found stone tools, butchered animal bones, and traces of fires. Some of the bones were from species that don't live in Britain anymore, like reindeer and mammoths. The cave goes pretty deep beneath the castle. This whole other world was sitting under a medieval fortress, and nobody knew it was there. Archaeologists are still figuring out who exactly lived there and when, but the age and condition of the site makes it one of the most important prehistoric discoveries in the UK. The Mustang Caves, also called the Sky Caves, are up in northern Nepal, carved right into cliff faces, some more than 150 feet above the ground. They're not sealed by rocks or ice or anything, but by how remote and hard to reach they are. A lot of these caves haven't been touched in hundreds of years. Some were used as homes, others as burial spots or monasteries. The oldest ones go back over 2,000 years. When explorers started checking them out in the early 2000s, they found caves packed with mummified bodies, old manuscripts written on palm leaves, paintings. In some caves, bodies were bundled up skulls stacked neatly, and there were religious items placed with them. One chamber had more than 40 skeletons lying side by side. Other caves had Buddhist murals that still looked pretty fresh, all things considered, even though they're over 800 years old. The entrances are so tricky to get to that nobody's totally sure how people even accessed them back then. I mean, because of the dry air and high altitude though, everything stayed preserved way better than it would have anywhere else. With all that said, I've been your host, James. I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.